Let us now turn to the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, who made his speech to the party's conference, which was in Aberdeen yesterday. Let's have a listen to part of it.
Conference independence offers Scotland a fresh start. This is a moment of decision. We all face a choice. Decline, decay in Westminster and despair with Westminster Government, or hope, optimism and ambition with Scottish self-government. This is the moment for us to realise the true potential we have as a nation. Now is the time for Scotland to become independent.
So, Pete, just explain what John Swinney, he persuaded the party, actually, some of them against their wishes, to go along with something. So he didn't accept some members' original proposal to use the Holyrood elections next year really as a substitute referendum.
Yeah, well, John was very clear about what our intentions are and how we'll approach the next election. And what he said is that if we win an SNP majority in the next Scottish parliamentary election, that will start negotiations for Scotland to become an independent nation. We did expect a referendum to follow that. I mean, we've had 3 independence majorities in the Scottish Parliament. It was only 2011 when we had an SNP majority that we were ensured an independence referendum. So what we're using here is the precedence argument when it comes to this. And, you know, if an independence majority in the Scottish Parliament is not enough to progress towards an independence referendum, then let's repeat what we did in 2011, have that independent SNP majority, then move towards an independence to settle our constitutional
But there was
future.
a debate, wasn't there? Quite a vociferous debate within the party, and some of them saying, actually, no, we should use that election as a substitute referendum.
I think you've got to be careful how that debate was characterised. It was overwhelmingly won by John's position when it came to this particular policy. And I think what happened at the end of the conference is everybody's united to get behind this. And we will now be going full scale to try and win that SNP majority. We're currently sitting at, I think, about 61 and 62 in the latest opinion polls. It's 65 that we need for a majority. So we're not all that far off it. And if not this, what? I mean, like, we have to resolve this constitutional tension we have in Scotland. There remains 50% of the Scottish people who want this revisited, who want to have a say on their constitutional
obviously, you sound
future.
like obviously you do want to revisit it, but then why not be more ambitious? That's the point, isn't it? That's what some of your members are saying you should do.
Well, what we're doing is just repeating the conditions which led to the last independence referendum, which was secured a majority of Scottish National Party members of the Scottish Parliament. If we do that again, I think everybody would expect that we would be given the right to retest this question, and if that's what we're going to be looking for at the next Scottish election.
I mean, as you know, obviously it requires the consent of the UK government, and Keir Starmer has said that while he's in power, he's not going to do it.
Well, of course he's going to say that, but like, what we will have created is the very conditions that led to that last independence referendum. Most of the things that happen in the UK happen due to precedent. We will be re-establishing that precedent, and we would expect that any fair-minded government would abide by that and ensure we got it. Now, the other challenge is that if this
actually, let me just ask Melanie about that first.
Because this is important. If this isn't good enough, then tell us what we need to do to get that independence referendum. If we're part of a voluntary union, there must be some sort of route out and some way to leave it. But they're not telling us what that might be. So if this solution's not good enough, could Melanie tell us what should be the case so that Scotland can exercise its right to revisit this?
I will gladly tell you what the alternative is. The alternative is a competent Scottish government led by Anas Sarwar and the Scottish Labour Party. I have to say, I think my constituents will be rolling their eyes listening to Pete litigating the arguments of the past. We had a referendum.
But his point
we had a referendum a decade ago. We were told at the time by the
circumstances
SNP,
are replicated.
we were told at the time it was a once-in-a-generation referendum. And while the SNP were squabbling at the weekend about independence, I'll tell you what was happening in Scotland. The NHS is in a mess. More than 40,000 people across Fife on NHS waiting lists in pain. One of my own family members who had to go to hospital at the weekend was told that it would be more than 4.5 hours for an ambulance to come and get them. They had to bundle him into the back of the car. He had to lie on the back seat of the car in pain and got emergency surgery when he got to the hospital. That's the reality of our NHS in Scotland. Do you know, in Glasgow alone, there are more people who've been waiting for more than 2 years on an NHS waiting list than there are in the entire of England. That's the reality of the SNP Scotland, and they've got more money than ever before, and look what they're doing with it.
We can have a debate about the Scottish NHS. We could talk about the increased amount of consultations we've seen, about the best ever results when it comes to hip and knee replacements anywhere in the UK, about the performance of our A&E service. We could debate about all of that, and we're happy to do that, and that will be a feature in the run-up to the Scottish election. But this is what we find all the time, Vicky, when we ask Labour politicians, if our solution to resolve the constitutional logjam isn't sufficient and good enough, what is the solution? How?
Melanie,
And they never ever answer that.
So you're saying that that's it for a generation, meaning what, 30 years?
That's what they said. That's what they said at the last referendum. Ask them. That's what they said at the last referendum.
So regardless
we
of anything
settled that question, and they want to litigate the arguments of the past rather than dealing with the fact that Scotland is the drug deaths capital of Europe, that more than 10,000 children are homeless in temporary accommodation, and that the attainment gap, the gap between the richest kids and the poorest kids, achievements in education in Scotland is widening, despite the fact the SNP said that that's what they should be judged on.
I'm going to bring in
They
Jeff
don't like being held to account, and we see it again today.
Bobby, as an Englishman, I won't go sort of chip in too long. Just a genuine question, Pete. Like, say, for example, they did give you the conditions. Say there was another independence referendum. Say you lost again. What would be the time frame for when you would ask again? Is it just would it be a 10-year thing?
Well, I think you cannot deny the right of democracy to any nation. So if another party...
But how often can you do that? Because it creates uncertainty.
If in another Parliament, I don't know, sometime in the future, I would suspect that if we lost a subsequent referendum, it would be a while before that would be revisited. That's just my own personal view. But you cannot bind future legislatures to say that they cannot have the right to bring this forward again. Now, and if another party was elected with a majority to have a referendum, then that's what should happen. Democracy matters, and this is what it's all about. We are a nation. We are part of what's called a union of nations. That we are supposed to have the right to determine our own future, but they're not allowing us this opportunity to revisit this.
Do you remember the audio got earlier, John, that was talking about people not being realistic with the public and sort of hamstringing yourself? Would you be willing to say, like, given what we've learned since Brexit, is that we can have independence, but there'll be a serious cost? It'll be complication, change and financial costs. Would you go into the next campaign being more transparent?
I would also balance that with the fact that we're probably one of the richest, most endowed nations when it comes to issues. Like, we've got most of the renewable resource within Scotland. We have fantastic skills in Scotland. We practically invented the modern world. Everything from tar macadam to television was invented by Scotland. So I do not accept this premise that somehow uniquely we would make a mess of our independence when everybody else does it so well.
With Brexit, the independence came as a cost, but somehow if Scotland were to do a similar thing, that wouldn't come as a cost.
Well, it's entirely different, I think. Leaving the European Union has been part of a union that we didn't want to be in Scotland are entirely different things. But we'll have that debate. That's what a referendum should be about. So people like yourself could come and tell us what the cost will be. We'll talk about the opportunities, the advantages of a small nation like Scotland, a small, flexible nation with all our talent and resources. Let's have that debate, and I think it's a legitimate thing to have. But they're not going to let us do it, so, even if we have a majority of SNP MPs.
If it got to the point where there was a majority, the polls were suggesting majority for independence, you would not allow that referendum to go ahead?
We've settled this question.
He's talking about holding people in a union they don't want to be in. I
mean, we settled this question. We settled this question a decade ago, and what they want to do in the SNP is keep on rerunning the referendum until they get the answer that they want. And I tell you who suffers in the meantime. Who suffers? No, they don't. They said that. You should accept the result. And in the meantime, the people who suffer are the people in Scotland, the people who are waiting in pain on NHS waiting lists, the poor kids whose life chances are declining.
We're just coming to the end of the programme. Can I just ask...
Communities affected by drugs. That's who's suffering while they focus on
about those issues. Why then is the Labour Party not doing better? Because at the moment, that performance has slipped off, hasn't it?
I'll tell you about our recent experience. Our recent experience was that
you're not picking up disaffected voters, are you?
We went into the Hamilton by-election, which was the most recent test of this, a Scottish Parliament by-election. Okay. We went into that with all the polls and the media and the SNP saying, you know, Labour's got no hope, they're not going to win here. I knocked on lots of doors there. My experience was that when voters actually thought about the choice in front of them and they actually thought about the SNP's performance and their record on the NHS, they decided, no thanks, we don't want any more of that. that, and that's what I think will happen
Jeff,
next
just
year.
briefly, because tomorrow we've got the leader of Plaid Cymru, Rina Purath, on our programme as well, and they are thinking that they will do very well against Labour come the elections in Wales. There does seem to be a resurgence, maybe, particularly in Wales, of this nationalist party. Do you think that's something that?
I think if you're applied in SNP, you've got to be so happy, because all you've got to do is sit and wait for one of the two main parties to become deeply unpopular. And that seems to come around often enough that it adds to their polling. I mean, you just have to ascertain how much of that disaffection is to do with just wanting your country run well, rather than how your country's run in a macro sense.
And also, obviously, there's also Reform UK, who say that they're going to do well in the elections next year.
I mean, they say that. Bring it on.
OK, we'll leave it there. That is all for today.